under which everything must still be done. You keep going because the field must be finished, because the weather might turn, because the grain must grow, because your family needs to eat, because tomorrow, astonishingly, this entire exhausting performance will happen again. And you are only in the morning. By the time the sun has climbed properly and your back has filed several formal complaints, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Your entire life is being run by grain. Grain decides your energy, your mood, your work, your worries, your rent, your arguments, your future, and occasionally whether your village gets through winter without everybody becoming dramatically philosophical. Bread is not just food. Bread is the centre of the universe wearing a crust. If you are a medieval peasant, especially in much of Europe, your diet depends overwhelmingly on cereal crops. Wheat, if you are lucky or in the right place, but more often rye, barley, oats or maslin. A mixture of wheat and rye that sounds rustic and charming until you realise it is mostly there because pure wheat is expensive and life has no interest in your bakery preferences. These grains become bread, pottage, gruel, ale, and basically your personality by necessity. This is one of the clearest mainstream historical facts about peasant life. Cereals provided the bulk of calories for much of the medieval rural population. Historians and archaeologists alike see it in records, rents, tools, milling systems, even in the physical traces left in teeth and bones. If your body is a machine, grain is the fuel. Unfortunately, it is also often low-grade fuel and sometimes delivered in emotionally challenging forms. Let's talk about the bread. This is not the airy, golden, lovingly sliced loaf of a modern supermarket aisle, where every package promises farmhouse style despite being born under fluorescent lighting. Medieval peasant bread is dense, dark, heavy, and built for endurance. It can be rough in texture, strong in flavour, and determined to make you chew like it's training you for war. And sometimes, very rudely, it contains grit. Because milling grain in the medieval world is not a perfect process. Grain is ground at mills, often the lord's mill, because naturally even your flour has a landlord, and tiny stone particles from millstones can end up in the flour over time. Historians have long noted that the wear found on medieval teeth may partly reflect this grain and grit partnership, which means your daily bread may also be quietly sanding your molars like an unpaid side project. Nothing says civilization quite like edible gravel. To get this bread, the grain must survive the entire agricultural cycle first. It has to be planted, tended, protected, harvested, dried, threshed, stored, milled and baked. And every one of those stages can go wrong. Rain at the wrong time. Drought, rot, mould, pests, theft, war. Lordly demands. A cart axle snapping because medieval transport is held together by rope and stubbornness. So when you hold a chunk of coarse bread in your hand, you are not just holding lunch. You are holding a year's worth of anxiety compressed into loaf form. That is why peasants are always tired and hungry, because they live one harvest away from a crisis and one loaf away from an argument. Your household likely stores grain with a seriousness modern people reserve for passwords and passport renewals. It is precious. It is counted. It is watched. It is stretched. If there is enough, you breathe easier. If there is not, every meal becomes a negotiation with reality. And grain is not only what you eat, it is also what you owe. The Lord may claim part of the harvest. The church may take tithe. Milling may cost you. Baking may depend on communal ovens in some regions. Suddenly your lovingly grown crop has developed a social life and started leaving home before you even get to enjoy it. Historians still argue whether peasant households in some areas exercised more flexibility and independence over milling and bread making than older top-down models suggest. Some villages likely had more local variation, customary rights, or practical workarounds than neat textbook systems imply. Medieval life, as always, refuses to stay in one tidy box. But the broader truth remains. Grain dominates the economy of survival. Now imagine what happens when grain fails. A poor harvest does not just mean fewer carbs. It means thinner bread, weaker pottage, more anxiety, and a calendar suddenly haunted by winter. It means people start substituting, stretching, diluting. Flour gets mixed with lower quality grains or whatever can pad it out. Bran may stay in. Loaves get coarser. Portions get smaller. Meals become more soup than substance. In truly bad years, people across different times and places resort to all kinds of desperate additions. Acorns, peas, chestnuts, bark flour in extreme later famines, and other fillers depending on region and circumstance. Not every village is constantly one bite from collapse, but scarcity is close enough to shape every decision. And even in better years, bread is so central that the entire emotional tone of the household can be determined by how much is left. You know that feeling when there is one slice of bread left in the kitchen and nobody wants to be the person who takes it, because then the house enters a new political era? Medieval peasants live in that feeling, but seasonally and with consequences. The making of bread itself is also work, especially for women, who often shoulder much of the domestic labour around grain preparation and food production. Grain may need cleaning, grinding in small amounts if hand processing is involved, kneading, baking, managing dough, timing and fuel. Even your simple loaf is attached to a whole chain of labour nobody is getting thanked for properly. And the loaf is not glamorous. It may be a little sour. It may be stale by the second day. It may require the jaw strength of a horse and the optimism of a saint, but it is filling in the technical sense, and that is enough to earn respect. A quirky tidbit? Some medieval beliefs and local customs treated bread with a kind of quiet reverence. In many places, wasting bread could feel morally wrong, spiritually uneasy, or simply too foolish to contemplate. People might mark a loaf with a cross before cutting it, whether from religious devotion, habit, or both. Because when your life depends this much on grain, bread stops being casual and starts being nearly sacred. And all of this affects your tiredness more than you might think. A grain-heavy diet can keep you going, yes. It can provide necessary calories. But when it dominates too completely, especially in hard years, or without enough variety, fat, protein and micronutrients, it can leave you functioning but not thriving. You are powered but not well powered. You are operational but not restored. It is like running a whole village on one extension cord and several prayers. That low-level undernourishment does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it just looks like what your life already is. Worn-out mornings, heavy limbs, slow recovery, and a body that never quite feels fully stocked for the labour it is asked to perform. So while you stand there chewing a dark crust with the emotional texture of roofing material, remember this: the bread is not failing you. It is trying its best. It is simply carrying too much of medieval life on its little floury shoulders. And you, meanwhile, are carrying the rest. By mid-morning, your hands are already sticky with sap, soil, or whatever combination of nature's patience and medieval negligence decided to adhere itself today. Your back aches, your legs are singing their unique lament, and yet the work continues. Hunger has not gone away. It is a quiet, insistent companion, nudging at your concentration, whispering "remember me" as you bend to tend the fields. This is when the day begins to demonstrate a subtle but unyielding truth. Medieval peasant fatigue is not accidental. It is baked into the rhythms of life. Labour itself is a demanding teacher. The type of work you perform is not just physical, it is all-consuming. You trudge through muddy fields, hoeing, weeding, sowing or harvesting whatever crops your village relies upon. Each movement is an act of negotiation with gravity and your own depleted energy. The same chores repeat every day with minor variations. Morning, noon, afternoon. Lift, dig, bend, carry. And yet somehow, every season feels like a new chapter in the same exhausting story. A mainstream historical fact to keep in mind: medieval peasants worked extraordinarily long hours, particularly during planting and harvest seasons. While nobles might enjoy festivals, hunting or leisure, peasants' days were determined by daylight and necessity. Sunrise to sunset, long before alarm clocks or coffee, your body's calendar is dictated by the sun and the unrelenting demands of soil and sustenance. Now consider the diet. You have had your coarse bread, your weak pottage, maybe a sip of ale, but it is barely a buffer against the exertion required. Protein, fat, and essential nutrients are in short supply, sometimes only appearing during special occasions. In other words, your body is doing industrial labour on a diet better suited for endurance walking, not for repetitive, high-intensity farming. You are running a machine at full throttle with a fuel mixture designed for efficiency, not performance. Not surprisingly, your muscles begin to twitch in protest. Your energy ebbs and flows unpredictably, and the notion of sustained vigour becomes a theoretical exercise. A quirky tidbit: in some regions, peasants supplemented their diets with foraged foods, odd fungi, or even accidental discoveries like edible weeds that today might appear in a trendy superfood list. Dandelions, nettles, and wild herbs were common. Some villagers would sprinkle these greens into pottage, not necessarily because of culinary flair, but because survival had an uncanny way of encouraging experimentation. Imagine sneaking a leaf into a stew and realising that centuries later, someone would call it nutritious. It is a subtle reminder that necessity can masquerade as innovation. Historians still argue whether peasants had more agency in diet planning than traditionally believed. Some evidence suggests communities were adept at balancing seasonal scarcity with local knowledge, employing creative storage, preservation, and foraging strategies. But even with clever tactics, chronic low-level hunger persisted. It is the background hum of daily life, like a thread you cannot untangle. Fatigue compounds because the human body operates not just on food, but on rest, hydration, and metabolic rhythm. Medieval peasants rarely received consistent sleep. Nighttime chores, tending animals, household responsibilities, or the simple anxiety of making it to the next harvest stretched their evenings into vigilance. You do not rest fully, the body never attains a state of complete replenishment, and your morning meal becomes both a ritual and a token of fragile hope. Imagine running a marathon every day with half the hydration and a breakfast consisting of dry cereal mixed with water, and you begin to grasp the scale of exhaustion. The work itself carries additional stressors. Weather is unpredictable.